So let's go ahead and get started. So we just sat down with llamatodd, which was delightful. And I didn't really know where that conversation was going to go. I broke it out into a couple of subjects, warned him in advance so he wouldn't feel like he got jumped there. And then we chatted for like right at an hour about Final Fantasy XIV and a little bit of World of Warcraft as he's been kind of jumping across back onto his Shadow Priest and giving it a go. And I wanted to talk about the differences in the games. The very first thing that comes to mind when you think of llamatodd is raiding. And so when we talk about raiding inside of Final Fantasy XIV, first of all, I want to talk about just combat difficulties. The vast majority of combat inside of Final Fantasy XIV is geared at making sure that all content can be cleared by all people at all times because they tie the story directly into the instances. When you are clearing the main scenario of the game, the main scenario quest, MSQ, which World of Warcraft calls the campaign quest with the little shield icon, that actually takes you into the dungeons as you go. And so if you can imagine, inside of World of Warcraft, when you're jumping through the various zones, you start in the Waking Shores in Dragonflight, you progress to Honoron Plains, Azure Span, and through Eldrassus. When we are in Final Fantasy XIV, we jump out to the various expansions, and we can actually progress through the zones in much the same way. And so when we're in this expansion, for example, we actually start the expansion in Ffxiv. We then go to Garlemald, and from Garlemald, we move on into, I believe it's Labyrinthos, then Garlemald, then Mar Lamentorum, then Ultima Thule. You actually jump back and forth. So sometimes you visit zones twice. And so, but effectively you have these 5 zones that take place, with Ultima Thule being the final. So it's not wildly different. You got a handful of zones, you got a handful of zones. It's not different. And you use the open world zones mostly for storytelling in these games. That is the single largest amount of time that every player will spend there. After that, zones get used for all sorts of things like going out and gathering, or there's some various content where you go out and you hunt big bad monsters, which World of Warcraft does with its various rares. World of Warcraft uses their dailies out here, which is fine. Final Fantasy XIV does the same thing with their tribal quests. If I actually jump over to Ffxiv, one of the newer zones, we actually hang out with some big elephants here, and we go and do FedEx delivery quests for them. It's a neat experience, and so those are a little bit different, and the open world thing is a big part of it, but the dungeons inside World of Warcraft that are tied to these zones, such as Ruby Life Pools and Neltharis, are optional. They're entirely optional. And so you do not have to do them as part of the campaign quest. And that's a little bit weird. In Final Fantasy XIV, there are optional dungeons. It would surprise some people to find out that some of the dungeons, for how lore significant and how impactful they are, that some of them are optional. But they are. There are just some dungeons that are absolutely optional. And in modern day, we really don't get that many dungeons anymore. Basically, with the upcoming expansion in 7.0, which I say upcoming because it's eventual, but we're in 6.0, when we go into the next expansion, we will get a level 91, 93, 95, 97, and 99 dungeon. Those will not be optional, they will be mandatory, and so therefore they will be available at that level, just like there are dungeons that are used at various levels in World of Warcraft. But over here, if you are higher level than that, you will be synced down to the maximum level allowed, which if you click on one of these and you scroll down in here, this will tell you that you will sync inside of Final Fantasy if you are level 84 or higher. It will force you back down to level 84. And so right from the get-go, the leveling dungeons are just different, because over here, you're going to go back down to level 84. You will have access only to the gear score that was theoretically max available at that time, and then you are synced down to the abilities on your bar, which means if you get some brand new ability that feels amazing at level 85, it will not be available inside of this dungeon, and that won't feel good. And so the syncing system does a great job of preserving content as best as possible as it was, in trade for the fact that the higher level character might lose access to some shiny new ability that they got because it gets ripped off their bar and is now a grayed out ability when you run it. But what that means is all of their content, all the way back to 2013 with A Realm Reborn, is still runnable today. I can hop into it right now, and as a result, they can have a run a random dungeon selection where I could go agree to run a leveling roulette, and this can pick any dungeon that was not done ever at max level. So this is all of the 15 to 49s, 15 to 47, 81 through 89, anything in between. All of the different various expansions, 51 through 59, all of those dungeons that were ever considered leveling at the time are inside of this leveling roulette. And so it is a really big list that is wildly random. Then your dungeons that were at cap, 50, 60, 70, or 80, but from a previous expansion are in a roulette. And then all of the ones from this expansion that are not the most recent two are in a roulette. And then you have the expert roulette, which is just the most recent two. It's more of a coin flip than a roulette. But this allows them to go back. They also allow trial roulettes, raid roulettes that pull from all these past expansions, because their syncing system will make sure that you're getting pulled back to what is appropriate for the time. How does leveling work within World of Warcraft? It's a lot different when we talk about dungeon difficulty. When you are going through other zones, you will basically be in a chromie type time, and you are done through what's called world sync, which means that if we just look at this expansion, if I'm in this zone and I'm level 81, all the monsters in this are 61, because I'm going to 70, then all of the ones here will be 61. The moment I hit 62, the entire zone goes to 62. And dungeons are the same way, which means that a 69 giggity and a 61 run a leveling dungeon together. They will be in there and all the monsters will be scaled to them. So leveling ends up being really weird, and it doesn't feel that great, and you end up not really wanting to run leveling dungeons that much. I don't see people spamming them, but that's also because they have a better option. Once they are max level, they can go into dungeons at normal, but they can also go into dungeons at heroic. Heroic is basically a step up from normal. And so if we go pull a dungeon like Algathar Academy and I look at the loot table, if I run it on normal at max level, this will drop item level 346 is what it will drop for my character right now. I am on a character that is currently equipped with a 363, so it would be worse than mine. It will drop a 346 piece of gear, and that's what I get from normal. If I run it on heroic, one step up, then it will immediately jump to 359. That's a lot better. But the dungeons are going to hit harder, things are going to have more life, it's just going to be a little bit beefier. A little bit less story mode, where you can get all your, if there's a quest tied to the dungeon, you can absolutely complete it in there, but what you will end up with is something that punches just a little bit harder. From here, we actually move into a higher level difficulty called Mythic. And this is broken into two categories. Mythic, which will drop item level 372, and Mythic Plus, which will begin at item level 376 and rise from there through a system that scales on Mythic Plus 2 to Mythic Plus 25. And so when you were in Mythic, just base Mythic, that is called Mythic 0, and that is what drops these, and that is because it does not have affixes. Once you get into higher level, it actually requires a specific key to run each dungeon, and then as you get the different keys, it forces you to run different dungeons, and you're trying to work your way up. And it's timed, and it allows there to be harder mode content geared around their 5-person player party. 1 tank, 1 healer, 3 DPS. And so Criterion is the hard mode dungeons added with the Endwalker expansion, and they are available in 2 difficulties. They are totally independent dungeons. The Sildine Subterrane is not a normal dungeon ever. This is not a harder mode of an existing dungeon. It is a brand new dungeon spun up specifically to make challenging 4-man content. 1 tank, 1 healer, 2 DPS. What this requires is this is going to go ahead and start requiring you to have an item level that's quite a bit higher, and they have a story mode variant with choose your own ending type things, and you get to make choices that steer your path. You can easily picture how that would work within World of Warcraft, especially in some of the bigger dungeons like the Honoron one where you're basically out in the whole zone. But Basically, you kind of choose your own path, and it's story-based. You can do it all by yourself if you want, or bring other people. From there, we go up into Criterion, and this starts to restrict things like how often you can be resurrected, and, you know, so it starts to tear down the way that the combat system works, specifically for Criterion. We've only gotten one of these dungeons, so it's the same dungeon over and over, and the rewards are pretty lackluster. They are basically cosmetic only or not at all, depending on how you look at it, as opposed to in World of Warcraft, this absolutely gives you the ability to push up your power level. You can see I have a 353 cloak on my druid here, and if I were to run this dungeon on my druid and get this to drop from this boss, it would be a 376, would be a massive upgrade, and it would come from dungeon content. Wildly different. Now, as difficulties continue, the bigger question is, well, does this game have raids? So when we have our Sildine subterranean over here with very little rewards, and we have our variant dungeons that have the different endings, that is all geared at 4-person or less. It is geared at small group content. It was heavily requested. We played an interview on stream this week from when I got to interview Yoshi P back in 2019, and I asked him, will there be Mythic Plus in this game? So like it's been long requested, and this is great, but this game does have raids. So when we jump into raids, there are 2 different delineations, well, 3. There's 3 different delineations. The first is called Trials. These are single boss fights. We get 2 during an expansion to level. It's a chance to fight your big bads. And then we get the final one that is the result of the end of the expansion. And then we get more throughout the expansion that drop as singular boss fights. They have a harder mode called Extreme. Extreme is meant to be the jump from normal into hardcore rating. It is meant to be very approachable. It drops a weapon that is really good for getting you into hardcore rating, and it is meant to be that jump that says, okay, now this time don't die to all these mechanics we've been trying to teach you, and let's add a little more spice to things. Not all extremes are the same difficulty. Cloud Deck Extreme towards the end of Shadowbringers was known for being very easy on Extreme, as opposed to some of the ones this expansion have absolutely punched back a little bit on launch, but the difficulty falls off very quickly due to gear, because they're not meant to be absolutely tuned to the tip top. So as soon as people start getting gear, as soon as they start to see how the mechanics are solved in a guide, the whole thing becomes much more manageable, and Extreme is a great way to have a ton of fun. Each Extreme has a unique mount, and each expansion, that mount is themed. It's different colors of the same mount, so it's definitely these kind of recasts of these mounts, and then if you collect them all from an expansion, you get a special mount. And so Extremes are the first type of rating inside of Final Fantasy. They are done with 8 people, 2 tanks, 2 healers, the rest DPS. And from there, we move into what is actually called raids, and those are also 8 people. Each expansion gets 4 raid fights on launch at the 0.2 patch and at the 0.4 patch, which are 8 months apart. Therefore, they all start with basically, we abbreviate them. So last expansion was Eden. This expansion is Pandemonium. So last expansion we started with an E. This expansion we start with a P. Because people do still run old raids, so they might be interested in going and doing Omega, which, because it's all different things here, we refer to it as the Omega storyline, O, or they might be going back to run Heaven's with Alexander, A, and so they are all abbreviated that way. A Realm Reborn's coils broke a lot of this, so let's ignore that for now. And effectively, they always have 12 fights. They're released in sets of 4, but we number them 1 through 12. We get 1 through 4 on launch, 5 through 8 at 0.2, 9 through 12 as our final raid tier, which means you only get 4 bosses per raid tier. That's it. They don't really have trash these days. It's pretty much straight into the boss. The final boss gets like a second phase, but you basically jump into Savage, which is the harder mode of these fights, and Savage is meant to challenge people. The first boss is meant to be a step up from Extreme, very approachable, but you need to know your stuff. You're gonna wipe a lot. If you are willing to put in your work, you will get there. The second fight is meant to be just a little bit harder than that. Super beginner groups, maybe clearing the first fight a couple of times, getting some loot, but a lot of people that can get their first fight down in a week, could push and get the second fight down in a week, assuming they have enough raid hours. And the third fight is meant to be a great deal harder. It's a massive step up. You only have 4. We got to get this train moving if we're going to challenge people. So the third fight is oftentimes seen very, very hard compared to the second fight. This is going to vary by tier, but just typically the third fight's a massive step up. And then the fourth fight is supposedly the hardest it gets. Now, depending on the particular tier, depending on the particular fights, people might disagree about, oh, this mechanic's really hard in the first fight, and the third fight wasn't that bad, or the third fight was so hard that I actually thought the fourth fight was easier by the time I was capable of executing on the third fight, or whatever. Depending on the tier, that's going to determine if that holds true for the pattern, but in theory, it's meant to be something we design people to be able to hop in, and you do not need to have cleared the previous tier to start. So if midway through an expansion, you decide you want to start with 9 through 12 or 5 through 8, you can do that. And you can knock down the first fight, you can absolutely get there, you can earn your way through the second fight, you can struggle through the third fight, and then you can start your progression on the fourth and final fight. And so sometimes P3, for example, from the current tier, was for some people considered absolutely harder than P4. A lot of that had to do with the fact that P3 not only had some unforgiving mechanics, but everything in the raid was red, yellow, or orange. So it was very hard to tell what was going on. Very much not a colorblind friendly fight. And so Savage is meant to be that step up, and Savage was where best in slot gear comes from. The next type of rating that is available within an expansion is these 3 little ones I keep scrolling past. These are known as Alliance raids. They only come in normal difficulty, and they are done in 24 people. 3 groups of 8, with a standard party comp slightly adjusted. 1 tank, 2 healers, the rest DPS, and that is because 3 tanks is plenty for this content. It is meant to be casual and fun. It's absolute insanity. Does not come at a higher difficulty, and these come on the odd-numbered patches, 0.1, 0.3, 0.5, and so the gear they drop is meant to act as kind of catch-up gear for Savage for the more casual player. Wildly fun, great music. All these raids have their own story. They are independent of the MSQ. Alexander was an optional story. The Void Arc raid set was an optional story, and so all of this is optional, as opposed to narratively within World of Warcraft. The story culminates in the raid. The raid is your big bad boss. Trial fights over here are oftentimes tied to story. This was a story boss, this was a story boss, this was a story boss, this was a story boss. So we do get those, but raid fights and Alliance raid fights are not. Those are totally independent content that is wildly optional. You will not have to do them as you level up, and if you want to get access to the lore, you will not have to do them. Inside of Final Fantasy, not only are the dungeons optional, but the raids are optional as well, except that if you want to get access to story, you need to clear the raids. Within the raids, there are more difficulties. So the first is what is called Looking for Raid, LFR, your raid finder difficulty. This is your story mode, and they release the fights slowly. Historically, they've kind of just trickled the fights out. I don't even think they've always trickled them out in order. And this kind of drops catch-up gear for everybody. 382, still better than what this character's got equipped. I have a 372 on my neck. I could get a 382 from this. You can run this once a week, and you can go do this just for story. The weekly lockouts is true across raiding, pretty much universally in MMOs. That's a pretty standard way of handling that. And so we've got our 382s, but if you step up to the difficulty that's available on day 1, the very lowest difficulty is actually normal. Now, normal raids actually are 395, so they are substantially higher than a lot of the what most people are getting out of dungeons, if not like way higher than what people are getting out of dungeons. And you get a lot more bosses per tier. Look at this. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be the end of a tier for Final Fantasy 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now the question is, how often do we get raid fights? If I'm getting anywhere between 8, and I think the highest number of bosses in a tier is 13, how often am I getting raid tiers? Because you told me that it was 8 months. Let's go take a look at World of Warcraft. And so let's go to recent history, because that's what we're comparing here. We've got 196 days, 203 days, 218, 238. So they are actually more often than raid tiers drop inside of World of Warcraft. So they are actually more often than raid tiers drop inside of Final Fantasy. They are getting raids more often, and they are getting more fights per raid. They are also getting hard mode dungeons that allow them to have power and difficulty that approaches that of what raiding offers for smaller groups. Their raiding size is also flexible. So first of all, let's take a look at these LFR. So they release, so the raid opened up on December 12th for all 3 difficulties. There's been some changing of that over the years. Should the hardest difficulty drop on the same day? In Final Fantasy, they finally moved to stalling Savage. Savage historically dropped day and date for the 2nd and 3rd tier, but now we've stalled that, and I think people like it a lot better. Lets them take their time. But you can see that LFR did not drop. Wing 1 dropped after a week, and then we kept stacking it out until it was all 3 wings. Within normal difficulty, you can actually have a sliding number of people. So a sliding number of people means that if you have somebody that is absent, if you have somebody that cannot be there that raid night, and you normally bring, I think it's 25 people for max, and you normally bring 25 people and you drop to 24, that's okay. There's actually some groups that have found that maybe for certain comps, they can actually clear certain heroic bosses a little bit easier by dropping some people and putting some more responsibility on individuals, because everything scales and scaling is hard. And so you have a fluid version. Fido in chat saying it could be 30 people. So there's some number. 14 fans, just know that it's going to shift anywhere from 10 to an alliance raid. So imagine if anything from a raid group up to an alliance raid group could take on the same boss at the same time. And this came from back in the day. They used to be 40-man. Then they introduced, like, we've gone through different sizes. They've been as small as 10-man available raids. And so now which they call like mega dungeons, they categorize them differently. Karazhan is one. And so effectively what you end up with is this flex rating system that allows you to adjust for the number of people. And so that's really, really great. And that is also true on their harder difficulty called Heroic. Heroic here dropping item level 402. So we've stepped up a little bit, and you'll notice it's the exact same items at a higher rating, which is a huge difference in the gearing system within Final Fantasy XIV versus World of Warcraft. They can have the same item drop across a wide variety of item levels. Any item level they want. If you get a piece of gear when you're out in the world leveling from a quest, it will be scaled to the level you are when you receive it. And you can just get that and just hand it to you. And then if I'm higher level and I do the same quest at you at the same time, we're in a party, then I can get an item that's scaled to me. And so it's really, really great about adjusting the item level and them not having to spin up new loot and think about new cosmetics and all of that. How do we handle that? Now we jump into Mythic. Mythic is fixed at 20-man, and this is your 421 up to 424. And so 424 is your highest item level currently obtainable inside of World of Warcraft. And this is all done through a variety of difficulties. Now, the hardest difficulty in Final Fantasy I didn't name, and that is because the hardest difficulty in the game is known as Ultimate. Ultimate Raids. These are 8-man only. I don't even have them unlocked. I don't touch them. They are cosmetic only rewards, titles, very cool looking glamours, and we get them very, very rarely at an incredibly inconsistent pace. Ultimate Raids, the next one, when I'm filming this on January 20th, the next one drops January 24th and will be a combination of the Omega fights. So you'll notice we are in Endwalker, and I said that Endwalker is Pandemonium. Before that was Shadowbringers, and the Shadowbringers raid series was E for Eden, and if I go before that, we were in Stormblood. This is 2018-ish. We are in the Omega series, and the Omega series, it allows you to go back and reinvent those fights. So they're going to reimagine them, and so they are old fights. So to put that in WoW terms, it would be like if they went back to Wrath of the Lich King and had the fight include Yogg-Saron and the Lich King, and you had to fight them back to back. And if you die during the Lich King final phase, you start all the way over. They are broken into multiple phases. They have multiple different transitions and all these different points where people think about where they are. The most recent one to drop before this was DSR, and it got broken down into 7 phases, I believe is what I see people talking about. So they talk about, oh, we're on phase 7 prog. And so that's these big transitions, and they are giant problems to solve, and they are meant to be very, very hard. You cannot go into them higher than the level they're at. They are always synced. So the only way to get access to those cosmetic and title is to clear them on effectively a chromie time walking type state. Always. There is no way around. And the only loot is really cosmetic. And so I think people would be really interested in World of Warcraft designing this kind of everlasting 20-man mage tower type amalgamation of bringing back the most iconic fights. And so if you could start by fighting Gruul, and then Lady Vosh could come out and duke it out on her little platform, and then you have to go running off the platform and into the next room where Illidan awaits you, or it's the, you're trying to get the Ashes of Alar fight out of Sunwell, and you're doing all of that back to back to back. It would be incredibly challenging, and it's a great way to reinvent fights. We are about to get our second one for this expansion. They have said moving forward they'd like to do 2 every expansion, but aren't sure if they'll be able to. They have been very, very expensive to make and implement, and so we do not expect to always get them when they say they want to, but they are the highest difficulty in the game. Now, the next thing that llamatodd and I talked about that jumps to mind was when I asked him towards the end, what would you bring back to Final Fantasy after being logged into World of Warcraft? And he said the collection system. I believe he specifically said the word transmog, but then broadened his definition to be all of collections. What collections is a series of tabs down here, from mounts to pets to goofy little things that make you like get a bunch of puppies out and stuff. Some of them are more useful than others. To heirloom gear, to appearances. Transmogrification, transmog. And so what are these things within Final Fantasy XIV? Within Final Fantasy XIV, the first of those is mounts. And so we keep those over here in our mount guide. And I have every mount that I currently own, but you'll notice that if I go to the last page, that's it. I can't see them all. What does that look like in World of Warcraft? Well, I can go to every mount, I can scroll down past my favorites, and there's a bunch of mounts here I don't have. And I can not only see what it looks like, I can see where it comes from if I wanted to go get it. And if somebody is on a really cool mount, I'm on this lovely mammoth here, I can mouse over what they're riding, and it tells me that it ups it by 100%, which all ground mounts do. But more importantly, it tells me the current name of that mount, the Traveler's Tundra Mammoth. I can come over here and I can see people flying around on a bunch of mounts. The current expansion doesn't let you use them here, so we're going to come back to my capital city to see a whole bunch of super cool mounts. And so we can come in here, and I don't know that I have this one. So we've got the Dark Phoenix. We've got our Dark Phoenix here, and if I want to know if I have the Dark Phoenix, I can jump over here and I can say Dark Phoenix. I do have it, actually. And that comes from guild vendors. I had no idea. It tells me the cost, tells me where it comes from, but I say, wow, it kind of makes me wish I had more Phoenixes. Or more dark mounts. Are there other dark mounts? Oh, there's a Dark War Talbook. Very cool. Blackpaw here is I've got this. Oh, I should go mess around in some of the Darkshore content and unlock this bear mount. And so super cool stuff that I can jump mount to mount to mount, and I can see what they are, as opposed to in Final Fantasy where I have no idea. What I would equate this to is the Orchestron scrolls, where I can see all the Orchestrons in game. I don't know if I can see some of the ones that were tied to like various outside of game events or buying various things like that, so I don't think it shows them all. But all of the ones that are currently obtainable in game, I can come down here to Mortal Instance and say, oh, I need to go run the Amaro dungeon, and I have a chance at getting this. This one comes from Academia Niter, and so I can see where that comes from. So I have this ability, I can sort it by different things, I can even search for one. So if I want to know if I have answers, I can see that I don't have any answers, your answer on high, and I can see to get answers, I would have to material synthesize from this, and I can go dive down that rabbit hole to get access to that song. And so that is how the mount system works. The next tab within World of Warcraft over here is the pet journal. And this is all of your different pets, but also the pets have a pet battle system that is like Pokemon Light. And so what this is equivalent to, roughly, is A, from the cosmetic portion of you can summon them, it's absolutely like minions. And I have my minions here, which once again, I can only show you up to the 294 that I have, and if I don't have them, I would need to use Google or something like that to get access to them, as opposed to over in World of Warcraft, I would have the very same ability to see where it is sourced from and go dive down that rabbit hole. But in addition to that, in this game, they are used for a mini game that's like a MOBA called Verminion. And Verminion it's not everybody's taste. And I can tell you that based on the fact that to beat the final PvE Verminion game gives you access to Clockwork Twintania right here. And according to some of the achievement websites that I've tracked myself on, this is one of the rarest mounts in the game, or minions in the game. So telling you that I have this one says obviously I'm doing something that not everybody's willing to do. I think there's 24 levels. They're not that hard, so it's not a difficulty thing. It's that people literally hate it. However, this ability to go around the world and acquire them from all sorts of sources and fight trainers and fight your friends and have some variety to things and feel like you want to chip away at it daily or weekly or whatever is actually included over here through a system called Triple Triad. Triple Triad is a card game where I collect the different cards and I can see where they come from. I can go gather them, so it functions very well in that way. And then in addition to that, there's different things, achievements and things like that behind them, different tournaments, all sorts of things I can do. So it's very, very similar to the pet battle system if these could be summoned as pets in the world and if they could be upgraded. There are 4 rarities of pets in World of Warcraft, from the white quality to the green. It's gray to white to green to blue. And so here's a green. I've got some blues, white screens. So I think that's right. And then they can be leveled up to 25 times. It doesn't mean you receive them at level 25, and some you cannot even receive them in higher rarity through grinding. So if they are caught in the open world, if you found a rare one, you would catch a rare one. But some have to be upgraded with various tokens and things like that. So it's just different, and it builds a lot more collection into something that is wildly optional. What is the next tab of this brilliant collection thing? The toy box. This thing is silly. I have all sorts of things that can just make me become trapped in amber. So if I drop out of my mount mode here, I can literally just, oh no! And they're just goofy. They're just goofy. Some of them do more interesting things than other. I can pull a mailbox out of my pocket and stuff like that. But it's just super goofy stuff. I can remove it at any time. It's fine. And so there are some that actually perform real use, but the vast majority of them are just silly. They are just another thing to collect. Just one more thing. And since they don't really make that great of use of their music tracks, they don't have as strong of a music score as Final Fantasy XIV. That is very similar to when I collect orchestrons, which in my house, I never actually play orchestrons, so it never really matters. It's just another thing I can get if I want to get them. The next tab, though, is where things really shine. This is called the Heirloom System. The Heirloom System here is a system where at any time I can pull a piece of gear out of thin air. This piece of gear can be upgraded multiple times to determine the maximum item level it can go to, but the item level that it is will be based on the character level that equips it. And so this character is max level, and so it will go to its highest, which is 183, which caps it at the current highest that they can be upgraded. There will be a 6th tier of heirloom added soon enough, which will allow it to get up to, I assume, something like 300. And because this one's capped at level 59. And so as you level up to 59, this continues to level with you. And this is the gear that you equip on leveling characters. If you have a set of it equipped, you start to get perks, the biggest of those being that you reduce the amount of rested experience that you consume by 30% if you have 2 equipped, and you reduce it again by 30% if you have 6 equipped. So if you have a full set of this equipped, you have a massive reduction to the amount of rested experience you consume. And heirlooms here are a whole stack. It's a massive gill sink. That's why mine aren't all allowed to go to cap. And you can acquire them from different sources, and there's all sorts of cool things in here, and they allow you to level alt and never worry about gear. How does Final Fantasy handle this? Final Fantasy handles this through poetics. Every piece of content in the game, as a reasonable statement, super broad, drops tomestones. The highest level content in the game drops your capped tombstone, which updates every 8 months. That rotates down into your uncapped tombstone, and then everything else just unilaterally shares poetics. And poetics are something that you can go to a capital city of any previous expansion, or you can go to the gear sourcing city of any previous expansion, which is the secondary city, and you can buy poetics gear. And so if your character is level 50 or higher on any of the mini jobs all on one character, if they are 50 or higher, you can start to do this and equip this at the level cap for that expansion, which means that as soon as you're the level cap for that expansion, so right now I'm in Shadowbringers, and so in A Realm Reborn, we would have been capped at 50, Heavensward capped at 60, Stormblood capped at 70, which I'm in right now, Shadowbringers at 80, and then the current expansion doesn't have poetics yet, but when we move into the next expansion, it will immediately be in poetics. I can buy all the old gear for poetics, and this stuff is incredible. It's outrageously good. This is basically the end of expansion, basically best in slot gear, made available for a currency that you almost always have just laying around at least a little bit. And so I can buy weapons, I can buy gear, and I can buy this set, and it allows me to level up basically from this expansion to the top of the next expansion and really not worry about gear. It's replaceable once you're in the mid-range of the levels, but it is good enough to get you to the end of the next expansion, worst case. If nothing else drops, it's not a big deal. And so as soon as you're 50 in A Realm Reborn, you can purchase the level 50 Poetic set, and that can probably get you to 60 or close to it without really worrying about it. You run some dungeons, something else drops, it's better, great. If not, no worries. Once you're 60, you can equip this. It's amazing at first, and it slowly wears off till you're 70, and then it slowly wears off till you're 80, and then the current expansion, you're actually going to replace your Poetics gear reasonably through, because it's the current expansion for now, and then eventually we'll get to where that doesn't matter as much anymore either. But what ends up happening is I have to buy this for all of my characters. Now, gear in World of Warcraft is per character, but will allow that character to jump through the various specs. So Druid has access to 4, a Demon Hunter has access to 2. Most classes have access to 3 ways to play. All 3 can share gear, but only on that character. If I make a second warrior, there's nothing I can do from gear from my first warrior if it weren't for the heirloom system. That's the only gear that is bind on account that I can just move around. Otherwise, I've got to source all new gear, which is why they need a system that's bind on account, that I can just pull it from anywhere and I can just toss it in the trash. It would be like if the Calamity Salvager inside Final Fantasy allowed you to buy back your Poetic set. Here's how gear works here. We break it down by role. So we have tank gear, healer gear, physical ranged gear, magical ranged gear, except ignore blue mage because their level cap is lower, and then melee are allowed to do whatever they want. They have like 3 gear sets across them because it's confusing. So within this different gear, what would happen is if I leveled my paladin to cap and then I threw my old sets in the trash, I would have to reacquire those for fresh poetics when I went to level my warrior. Heirloom, that's just not the case. It's a set of gear that you would pull straight out of the Calamity Salvager. So you do have to buy it once. So it's not the same as getting it for free. And instead of going to a Calamity Salvager in a random city, going to the one in one of the 3 capitals, I could do it from anywhere. I could just pull up a menu and I could just say, you know what? I want to pull this gear out, and I could just grab it. I could just have it. And out it would go. And so it's really, really nice. But this is actually, none of these are the tab that made llamatodd bring this up. What he brought up was transmog. Transmog here is all of the appearances, and yes, it has all the same things. If I don't have it unlocked, I can see where it's sourced, but more importantly, there's no cap. If there's an item in game, there are 612 unique helmets that are equipable on my character, and so I can see them. And if I switch to another character, that number will update to the helmets that are equipable on that character based on any faction locking, race locking, class locking, armor type locking, anything like that. There are 612 equipable. Back pieces have very few restrictions, so you can see it jumps to 1242, and this is every back piece that's ever been available in World of Warcraft. And you can see I own many of them. And so what that means is until I get into the ones I don't own and I see where they drop from, I can actually go in and I can hop on a mount, or I can go to a vendor and I can open up the transmogrification menu and I can swap anything I want. And if I get something new, it's mine forever. Now, unfortunately, that does mean that the character that its collection it's getting added to has to be the one that finds it. So if a piece of warrior gear drops and it is warrior exclusive while I'm on my druid running an old raid, that doesn't help me. So there's a little bit of frustration around it, but once it's yours, it's yours. There's no glamour dresser to keep track of, none of that. Inside of Final Fantasy, however, that's not the case. And so if I jump in here, I can first of all only edit this from zones that other people cannot be. So I can edit it from my Grand Company Hall, which would be like a private order hall or like a garrison, but other players cannot join you there. Or I can edit it from here. Only places that other players cannot go can have access to my glamour dresser because reasons. And I can only store up to 800 items. This number's been slowly increased over the years. They continue to increase it, but it's always a placeholder. And if I want to have different sets, I go to plates and I can have up to 20 different ways I can look. So if I want to be a blue bear, I can. If I want to be a green chicken, I can. Obviously, I take the cosmetic system incredibly seriously. And as we jump over here, what I can do is I can just save sets. I can just spin off outfits. It's no big deal. I can just make them. It's fine. I can also see the different raid sets that are available. Great, awesome. Or the different sets I've gotten from like various campaigns or pre-orders or whatever. Really, really great. Really, really great. And so if I want to go collect old sets, it becomes a whole other system like Orchestrons, but with gear. Now the downside is they are not dyeable. So you would have to go to something like Guild Wars if you want this interface with this level of flexibility. That would be Guild Wars. I don't know what to tell you. I've made a video comparing WoW and 14 and which one did cosmetics better, and the winner was Guild Wars. But what are you gonna do? But that is the transmog system that llamatodd brought up when we collabed. The next thing he brought up is he's been getting into World of Warcraft, and he got to his vault. Now this character has an unopened vault this week, so let's go take a look. So what the vault is every week on each character, I have the option to participate in whatever type of content I want. I could participate in raiding, I could participate in Mythic Plus, the hard dungeons, and I could participate in PvP. And those are the three challenging types of content in the game. Those are the three types of content that people really get sweaty for. And so those would be the three types of content where you would want better gear, that you need better gear. Not just because you like it, but because you'd like to see improvement in your gear score as part of the extrinsic reward to the internal reward of getting better at the game. And at the end of each week, I can go and do my scratch off system. So what we have here is my Great Vault. Are you guys ready? All right, here we go. So what I got is last week I did no raid bosses. Last week I did no PvP, so I have nothing checked off. I did 2 mythic dungeons last week, which is not 4, it is not 8, so I got one choice. And I got a trinket. It is dropping at item level 382 based on the difficulty that I cleared, which was a very low difficulty. And I could also swap that for aspect of tokens of merit. We're not going to do that, I want that reward. Am I sure? Yes, I am. And I got another mythic keystone, which says if I want to, I can run the Algathar Academy at level 2. And that it would be getting the weekly modifier of tyrannical. So if I look at this, this is going to be replacing my 350 gear, and it gives me a nice upgrade there. And all right, I got it. Pretty good. That just increased my power based on the progress I did. The downside of that system is I would have to engage in all of this content on every character every week. Does not mean that if I do run raids on one character and PvP on a different character, that they both get all these check marks. You only get to pull one piece out at the end of the week. So as long as you get at least one, you're getting something. But obviously top end players are going to want to check off all 9 bingo boxes on all of their characters that they want gear for. I kind of wish it was that if a character checked off even a single box, that it got access to every box that your entire account had access to. So if you do if you get 5,000 honor on your warrior, and then you raid, you clear all 6, you clear 6 of the 8 in Vault of Incarnate boxes on your priest, and then you clear 8 mythic dungeons on your druid, that all 3 characters would get access to all 9 boxes at the gear score relative to what that character ended up achieving. Kind of a weird hybrid between the two, but I wish it did that because it would make me, who spend limited amount of time in World of Warcraft in a week, feel like I could afford investing in multiple characters. People who only play WoW don't necessarily think it's a big deal to do this unless they hate one of these modes on one of those characters and they really want the checkboxes. Maybe they hate the way their class plays in PvP, and so they just feel like, to get my raid progression, I don't want 6 choices, I want 9 choices. So then they're grinding PvP even though they hate it. What is the equivalent inside of Final Fantasy? The equivalent inside of Final Fantasy is called Wondrous Tales. Wondrous Tales is a bingo scratch-off card, and every week I have a choice of running multiple types of content. This sounds a lot like the upcoming trader post inside of World of Warcraft that's going to allow you to get cosmetics through doing various types of content. I can run anything I want, and from the bingo cards that I get, and if I want to run something more than once, I can use second chance points that are earned by running content with players who have never run that content before. And I can also use that to realign things over here. And basically, every time I complete a piece of content, it puts a random stamp on this 4x4 grid, and these can have a chance of forming lines. Every line that is formed, if I just put any 9 spots on here, I get a guaranteed reward. If I get 1 line, I get the first tier and the 1 line. If I get 2 tier, I get the first and the second. And if I do the third, I get the base reward, the first, the second, and the third reward. And I've got some choices in here. 1 line gets me some of the max level cap tome as my kind of big one, as well as these certificates, which let me buy things off of her as a vendor, as well as some currency to their equivalent of Darkmoon Fair called the Golden Saucer. The second drops me the uncapped tombstone and just a silver reward, but it's better than bronze. And then a little more of that currency. I pick any one. And then when we get down to the third one, this is a golden certificate. These are incredibly rare. Or I could pick 3 silvers or 20. This is mythical. This is really hard to get. There's only a couple of combinations that give you 3 lines. And I give people a hard time that say they've gotten it before because I'm pretty convinced that it's a lie. But you'll notice that nowhere on here is true power. It takes an hour and 15 minutes to 2.5 hours to cap your tombstones in a given week, depending on what you're doing. So getting 50 from doing Wondrous Tales just really doesn't move the needle. It's capped at 450 in a week anyway. It's not hard to hit cap. WoW, I would use the term Valor to explain what these are. And so it's not really that big of a deal if you don't engage with Wondrous Tales at all. Every time you pick up a Wondrous Tales book, you have 2 weeks to complete it. It drops on a Tuesday. And if you pick it up anytime in that week, you have until not just the next Tuesday when the week would end, but also the following Tuesday. If you wait past, it's kind of like the old cash system, where as soon as you complete this, you can still pick up the one that's going on right now. So you could complete up to 2 of these at a given time. The one that you've been holding on to, as well as the current one. I can't start on the current one until I finish this one, but you can have 2. So here's what that does. This experience here is zeroed out, so ignore that. That's because I'm on max level. What this does is on the class you turn it in on, any class you want, you could complete all 9 on a warrior and then switch to your white mage to turn this in. It gives exactly 1/2 of a level worth of experience, which means that if you have a level 10 class and a level 68, you're probably going to want to turn it in on the level 68 because that's a lot more time saved, but you do you. So it is exactly 1/2 of a level's experience. This is the closest I can get to the vault. There's really nothing quite equivalent that starts to guarantee loot drops. Granted, the tome gear inside of Final Fantasy is pretty freaking good, and it's very easy to get tomes in the game. So, not as big of a deal. Best in slot is much more straightforward. The gear system as a whole is very, very simple. There is no trinkets, as opposed to in World of Warcraft. Trinkets are something that can have a variety of things. They can have on-equip causes. They can also have on-use causes. And so they can do different things that can even then sometimes make it feel like it changes the way your class plays. The closest equivalent to that would be the Bozja Zadnor haste set, where they do something different while you're inside Bozja Zadnor, except that it's true in all content. So like it just breaks things for the fun, but also makes balance really, really hard. So that's the vault. After that, he started to talk about kind of what you do on a basis, and he starts to talk about these roulettes, which I went over in difficulties, and how the expert roulette, if you want to run this, is a great source of tomes. You get 40 per plus the reward for the dungeon. It being the highest level dungeons currently in game means that it also drops a fair bit there. And so you also get 50 tomes for running that. So you get 50 plus the roulette bonus. So you get 90 for your first one of these every day. But you're capping tomes unbelievably fast for the week anyway. And so it really just runs with a lack of variety. The equivalent within World of Warcraft as far as a complaint goes is that over here, I get my 2 dungeons. I get 50 for running the dungeon, 40 for doing that, and I have to run the same 2 dungeons over and over until I hit my weekly cap. Over in the World of Warcraft side, within a season of your Mythic Plus, what you end up with is 8 dungeons that are on rotation, and then next season it'll be a different 8. They've taken a couple from the current expansion and a couple from past expansions, and so they've added a little variety. Historically, they didn't even do that. You were just doing the same crap for higher item level. So they've added a little bit of variety. So there are some Dragonflight dungeons that have not had a chance to be on the Mythic Plus rotation yet. And I think that helps kind of save some of that joy and discovery and mastering of running these at a higher difficulty for the future when we're going to want that variety. So very, very cool that they've started doing that. But effectively, to Mythic Plus runners who only do Mythic Plus as their content, if they want to run Mythic Plus a bunch of times in a week, remember that your vault asks you to run 8 Mythic Pluses in a week. If you want to run all 8 and you want to do that across multiple characters, you're going to start seeing the same dungeons with this week's modifier over and over and over and over. So it's a complaint in both games. It has a lot to do with just, it's very hard to satisfy an MMO player base. And that, ladies and gentlemen, basically sums up kind of what llamatodd was talking about. It kind of sums up a lot of what he compared as far as what he liked in one game versus what he liked in another. He is mostly focused on raid content inside Final Fantasy XIV. So coming from his perspective, you see a lot about just kind of quality of life everywhere else, but then what gives me the best variety if I want to have that variety. If I want to do things account-wide so that I can run the same content on a different class because that makes it different. How do I get there? And so we jumped back and forth multiple times. I try to jump in and make sure that I'm not saying anything that leaves people in the dust that only play one game. And I'm trying to make sure that I kind of explain anything that he says that might leave people behind. I assumed during that podcast that most people at least understood 14. So hopefully this also tossed some exploration for people that listened from a World of Warcraft perspective and said, I don't know what you're talking about, but it seems cool. And so I thought that maybe that would give you a little bit of an explanation on how to jump from World of Warcraft to Final Fantasy, or how to at least listen to people talk about the other game, because the games really are pretty similar for the first 80 to 90% of that game. And that last 10% is really hard to understand if you don't at least have the terminology down to understand what's truly different and what's just a different word choice. Aspect inside of Final Fantasy is referring to the different aspects of ether, the different things that the world is corporeally made of. Aspects within World of Warcraft are referring to the 5 dragonflights that protect us, with the obsidian oathstone all the way through to the bronze oathstone, and the 5 different flights of dragons that protect our world. So these different terms, you might even see the same word and it means something drastically different when you're jumping game to game.